we're just broadcasting to YouTube now, and in a few seconds, we will start our session for today. Just broadcasting to YouTube. Okay, great. So we are live on YouTube, and let's start. So I would just want to thank everybody for being here today. Hopefully more will be joining. Definitely, actually, more will be joining. This is a very exciting session. We've been, working behind the scenes with Susan for a while now, trying to set up this. And Susan is a great speaker in this domain. So we will hopefully benefit a lot from her. I have so far, and then hopefully with this presentation. Same as Trevor, as you said, we're just eager to know more about the skills, because one thing for sure, what we are teaching today, especially in universities and those educational platforms, is not the skill of the future. And I also teach in that space. I'm fond into the AI and the artificial intelligence, the blockchain, and so on and so on. And when we want such skills of the future of digital transformation, those skills are very rare or scarce. And hopefully we can, grow them. So Susan will highlight, of course, more on the subject. Let me introduce Susan first. I want to welcome you to STFA. On behalf of the chapter, or actually the board, and I want to tell you, you're welcome to this platform at any time. Susan Galletli, portfolio manager at Exxon. She is accountable for the development and positioning of Exxon certification portfolio. This includes leadership of product owner and exam development, guiding them to ensure that Exxon certification portfolio optimal support professional and organization in developing the skills they need for digital age. Next to her role with Exxon, she's also certified chief examiner for Verisum, which I think she will mention also in her presentation, with the International Foundation for Digital Competencies, IFDC. In this role, she is responsible for helping the future to develop the Verisum philosophy and community. So, Susan, welcome to this platform. If you want to say anything before we start, and the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Let's see how it goes with sharing my screen. Make sure all that goes fine. Can you see my screen now, Rudy?
Not yet.
Okay, maybe I have to do something else. Bear with me.
See, that's what we were talking. Yeah, it works now.
Yeah, okay, great. Okay, perfect. So welcome, everybody. I'm very pleased to be able to be here today for this session. So thanks from whichever part of the world you're calling from. I don't know if all of you are I know that you're in Beirut, I think, Rudy, and some people are in Dubai. But yes. Anyway, wherever you're calling from, welcome to this session. I'm glad you've joined us, and I'm happy to be here. The session is Developing Skills for the Economy 4.0, and specifically as well, tackling digital transformation with Verisum. And as Rudy says, I'll be touching on a lot of the topics which he mentioned around digital skills. So, Rudy, thank you. You gave a great introduction, so I'm going to be very quick on this one. I'm Portfolio Director within Exxon and Chief Examiner Verisum with the IFDC. But I think probably the most important thing is that I'm a passionate advocate of lifelong learning, and I hope that will become very clear as well as we proceed through. So what can you expect from this session? Well, I'd like to touch a little bit first on how the world is changing, and particularly this concept of Economy 4.0, which you may or may not have already heard about. I'd also like to say a little bit about the challenge and the opportunity of digital transformation, and, as Rudy touched on before, the digital skills gap as well that emerges from that. I'd like to provide a short introduction to Verizon, which is a service management approach for the digital age. Some of you may have heard of it already, for others it may be completely new. And I will also provide a very brief introduction to the Exyn digital transformation portfolio as well. So what about this economy 4.0? Well, some of you may have heard the term maybe instead a fourth industrial revolution. And if we think about macro changes that have gone on, in our society, in the first industrial revolution was all about mechanization and steam power. The second one, which is what we often think of as the industrial revolution, where mass production came on board and electricity. With the third one, computers were, of course, a massive game changer from the start. But this fourth industrial revolution that we're in now is really about cyber and physical systems working together. Everything is connected in networks. Think about Internet of Things. So it's a much more complex environment than we've had before. So that's the fourth industrial revolution, but the implications of the economy 4.0 go even further. And, I'm not going to mention all of the ones here, but I'm going to pull out a few, and I'm sure it'll be recognizable to you as well. One of the points is the on-demand economy. We expect to be able to access services when and where we like, on demand, on the fly, in a mobile way. We also live very much in a collaborative economy. We hear a lot these days about co-creation and collaboration. It's very much at the heart of Agile and DevOps working as well. Reputation economy and trust economy is also becoming important. Obviously, this is partly because of developments such as fake news and this kind of thing, that trust becomes important. But also, if you think about, the ethics around AI, trust becomes very important if algorithms are going to have, a lot of power and a lot of influence. And the consumer economy and the experience economy, CX and UX is something that we hear a lot about these days, because there's been a kind of shift from, let's say, contractual agreements towards the experience of the user, of the consumer, and that's what's key now. So these are just some of the implications of this economy 4.0 that we're in now, which results of these complex systems, physical and virtual, working together. Everything is connected. I don't think I can go through the whole hour without mentioning COVID-19. It's got to be done. It's had a huge impact on us, let's be honest, over the last year and a half. And actually, a recent report revealed that more than 90% of companies said they sped up their digital transformation process as a result of COVID-19. So, these are organizations that were thinking about digital transformation, and they probably had a nice, calm 5 to 10 year plan to get it going. And of course, everything was massively accelerated because of the pandemic. And that's, also a bit of a game changer of our time, if you like, because, it offers challenges to organizations, but it also offers opportunities, and that acceleration, it's a fact. It's something that's happened as a result of the pandemic, and it's interesting. So a little bit more about the challenge and the opportunity. Some of you may have heard this research before that indicates that 70% of digital transformation initiatives will not reach their stated goals, which is, of course, a lot of waste. This was first reported in 2018, so I was looking for something a little bit more recent, and I found some research of McKinsey, which was maybe even more shocking, that just 16% of executives say their company's digital transformation efforts are succeeding. So apparently this is something that's very, very difficult, digital transformation. And if we think about the reasons why, there's a few patterns that we can see. One is unclear or aligned strategy or goals. If you don't know what you're trying to achieve with digital transformation, there's a very high chance that you're not going to succeed. A second point is the lack of the right mindset needed to bring about change. And, part of that is like old-fashioned fear, but also lack of that adaptive business agility mindset that's needed to not just adapt to change, but to really embrace it as a given. A third point is the capability gap, and this normally really comes to the fore when companies start to scale up. Quite often, a consultant will be brought in to do the first part of digital transformation, and it's all fine. And then when you start scaling up and the consultants leave, then the capability gap, the lack of knowledge within the internal organization becomes exposed. And the fourth one, and I'm sure all of us have experienced this at some point in our careers, and that's a lack of a holistic approach. So, these kinds of silos where there's great things going on, but it's not all being brought together. So that's the challenge. And, I really like this quote from Joe Peppard. He's a principal research scientist at the MIT Sloan Center. And he says we shouldn't be trying to design a more digitally savvy IT unit. We should be thinking in a completely different way about how to organize for success. And, as such, he even advocates that IT as a wholly separate function should cease to exist. Can I just do a quick in-between check, Rudy, that you can all hear me fine?
Yes, we can. I just want to remind also the participants that I shared the WhatsApp group and our Linktree to social media to follow us and so on. So the floor is yours again.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. I'll come back to this quote later as well. I think it's a very interesting idea. So I've touched a bit on the challenge, but what about the opportunity? Because, it's so difficult to do, but the benefits are massive, and that's why we all want to do it. There's lots of different research around this, and some of it talks about, organizations with a strong learning culture. That's a very important part of digital transformation. Another important point and aspect of digital transformation is being data-driven and really knowing how to exploit data. So, these kinds of organizations, there's lots of different research around this, but they're more likely to outperform the profitability of their peers. They're more likely to improve return on investment. They're more likely to exceed their top business goals. They're more likely to report higher net revenue growth. So I've just picked out a few of the different research points here. But all of it, what it leads to is the fact that even though we've seen that many organizations fail with digital transformation, we're still all jumping on that bandwagon. And the reason why we're doing it is because the benefits, if you get it right, the benefits are massive from a business perspective. And as a result, the digital transformation market itself is expected to grow at an annual compound growth rate of 22.7% between 2019 and 2025. So very difficult to do, but if you get it right, massive benefits. So the opportunity is very much there as well. And some organizations are, of course, very successful with it. And I'd like to just share one success story with you, and that's Johnson Controls. Their aim was to craft a new IT operating model for automating and securing building operations. Their clients are tech companies, sports stadiums, large facilities. They employed what they call a big bet, no regret approach to using modern technologies. I think probably some of us have known this from our own career as a kind of big bang approach. Mostly it's not advised to do a big bang approach, but if you're going to do it, then you need to make sure it works well. They chose it worked well for them, and it worked well commercially, but it also got them a lot of external recognition. They were chosen as IoT Innovator of the Year in 2019, and they also received honors for leadership training and development because they really focused as well on the human side of things and really sustainable cultural change. So it worked for them. And I really like this quote as well. You can see I like quotes when they're good. From Nancy Burse, the CIO of Johnson Controls, she said that the challenge is identifying the right balance of technologies that provide the experiences and security that customers require. I'm going to come back to that also later on in the presentation as well, the idea of this right balance of technologies in order to support the customer needs. So which set of technologies did they use? Well, particularly within Johnson Controls, this particular success story, they used cloud and edge computing. They used blockchain, which some of you may be familiar with, maybe from the cryptocurrency side, but it also has a lot of other applications as well around smart contracts. They used robotic process automation, which is actually a subset of artificial intelligence, which we've already touched on today as well. They used cyber security techniques, and they used big data analytics. So these were the 5 technologies that they used and integrated together to get them success. So I've provided a little background about, the economy 4.0 and the challenge and opportunity around digital transformation. And that brings me to the next part, which is, focusing somewhat on the digital skills gap. I know when, AI first started being talked about, and I guess certain elements of AI have been talked about already for many decades, but I think as a mainstream topic, it's definitely been talked about a lot more over the past 5 to 10 years. And I remember that, when I first heard about it, there was a lot of fear around it's going to take away all of our jobs. And at least in the sort of short to medium term, so let's say the next 10 years, which is where the most of the research is available for right now, actually, it will not eliminate many jobs. It's estimated to only eliminate about 5% of jobs in 10 years' time. But what it will do is it will change them. So probably around half of jobs will be changed by 10 years' time. They'll still be there, but they'll require reskilling and they'll be different. And, in fact, 90% of jobs will probably require digital skills. What we'll also see is that new roles will come about as a result of this, let's say, collaboration. There we have that word again, between human and machine. Humans and machines can complement each other when AI is done effectively, and that will generate new roles. And in terms of skills, there'll be a strong demand for technical skills because people will need to know how to, exploit these technologies and how to use them in an ethical way. There'll be a strong demand for technical skills, but there'll also be a demand for skills that computers can't easily master. Think about creative thinking, negotiation, but also things like empathy. That's a very human skill. And judgment and leadership. These kinds of skills will also be in a strong demand from the human side, let's say. So the result is that, more than half of all employees are expected to need significant reskilling already by next year. And in 10 years' time, that'll, of course, be even more because many, many jobs will have been changed by automation and AI. And this is from research from the World Economic Forum. So what are these skills? Well, there's lots of different ways to look at digital transformation skills. I particularly like this model from Deloitte University Press. They recognize the importance of technological savviness because you need to have knowledge of AI and these other technologies. Otherwise, you can't see how you can use them for your business. So that's always going to be an important element. But there are many other important elements as well, which are more, which are very diverse, different types of skills. So Agile's there again, providing a way of working which embraces change. Collaborative processes is very much part of the Agile and DevOps ways of working these days. And also, I like these ones, business acumen and entrepreneurial spirit. It's not enough anymore to sort of have these technical skills and then be working in isolation. You need to be able to really think about how, in a creative way, about how technology can help the business forward. And in that way, it really becomes part of the business. And UX design, of course, is up there as well, because we are living in that consumer economy, that user and experience economy, which is part of the new economy 4.0. So these are some of the skills which are needed as we need to get to grips with digital transformation. As you can see, it's a lot broader than just knowledge of technologies. Another way of looking at skills is, of course, to actually look at which skills are being asked for in job vacancies. And, LinkedIn is a useful resource for this. I couldn't find a list already for 2021. They don't have that yet, but I don't expect it to be very different, to be honest. So this is the skills that companies need most in 2020 based on LinkedIn job vacancies. And, if you look at the hard skills side of things on the right-hand side, you'll see lots of things we've already mentioned. Blockchain is there, AI is there, UX design, cloud computing, it's all there. And on the soft skills side, creativity, persuasion, collaboration, it's going to keep coming up again and again. Adaptability, which is obviously very much at the heart of Agile DevOps working, coming up again and again. And emotional intelligence, and I referred to empathy before as well. Very human skills, and very much in demand within companies as well, because those human skills are needed to be able to make the most of the technology for your business. So that's a bit of a look on the skills that are needed, but perhaps the most important thing that's needed in this new economy 4.0 is not so much the skills, although they're extremely important, but the mindset. And we need to have a lifelong learning mindset. I told you at the beginning that I was a passionate advocate of lifelong learning. We're used to learning at school and maybe at university, and then that's it. Then we go and work. And in the past, that was enough. In the past, you could learn a skill, and you could probably apply that skill and use that skill for the rest of your career. And that was great. We're not in that world anymore. Things change so quickly that you have to be continually learning and have that mindset. And, one of the things mentioned here, become a serial master. That means that, you probably won't be an expert in one thing during your career anymore. You'll have to keep reinventing yourself for that. Probably a lot of you are already very much IT service management experts, and, you became specialist at that. Maybe some of you have already adapted and become agile or DevOps kind of experts. We need to have that serial mastery and actually have, during the course of our careers, a number of specialisms. So we become a serial master. But other points that are important in this mindset are that you build your own personal brand and network, you own your own development journey. And also you do discover what you love doing and what your real intrinsic reason is for being, and try to be busy with that in your work, because that's the passion that you bring to your work. And that's also key to being able to perform well. And it's part of this lifelong learning mindset that we definitely need in the new economy 4.0. So I've given some background on, digital transformation and the economy 4.0, and also the digital skills gap. So which skills are needed in this new economy, and, how is the gap looking like right now? I also want in this presentation to give you a brief introduction as well to Verisum, which can be a useful approach to help fill that gap in some ways. So, we all love our acronyms in this business, don't we? And Verisum is no different. So it stands for Value-Driven, Evolving, Responsive, Integrated Service Management. And one of the important things about Verisum is that it is an enterprise service management approach. And basically, Verisum, has the perspective that an organization has to use all of its capabilities to deliver value to the consumer through products and services. And IT is one of those key capabilities, together with others, such as HR, sales, finance, marketing, and they all need to work together to deliver that value. And in some ways, this kind of does away with the whole IT serving the business thing that we've had in the last years, because it elevates IT not to being, a separate organization, or let's say a separate department that serves the business, but it becomes an integral part of the business itself. And because of that, this perspective, it really is an enterprise service management approach. It's not IT centric, it's looking across the board. And for me, that echoes back to that, quote of Joe Peppard from the MIT Center, that he said, we should be actually looking for a whole new way of organizing things and not having a separate IT unit. And in some ways, this is about this. It's about IT being an integral part of the business as opposed to a separate unit with its own, its own aims. So the Verism model itself is actually quite simple. There's an outer governance ring because everything that we should be doing should be in some way in line with the business strategy of the organization, of course, and we have to manage risk effectively. You have the service management principles, which act as kind of guardrails, and these will typically be around areas such as quality and security. And then you have these phases of the life cycle. It doesn't matter what you're doing with services, you have to define them, you have to produce them, you have to provide them, and you have to respond. And the way you do that is not prescriptive in Verism. If you choose an agile approach or a waterfall approach, in some ways it's up to you, but all of these stages of a life cycle will be relevant. And of course, running through everything is the consumer, and the consumer should be driving everything that we're doing. We talked about the consumer economy, the experience economy. So the consumer has to be at the heart of it all. So I know some of you have a service desk focus. So I was asked to particularly look at, what are the links between the service desk and Verism. If I think about service desk in the Verism model and, the question, where does the service desk fit into the Verism model? I could quite easily say everywhere, because of course the service desk is relevant to all phases of a service life cycle. But if we particularly look at where the service desk becomes particularly relevant, obviously it's in providing services, because the service desk quite often provides certain services like password reset or access management, some asset management sometimes. So the service desk is actually providing services. And of course, the service desk is very much the place where respond occurs, where users can give feedback or, they can be responded to incidents. And of course, the link with the consumer then is massive. And, that makes the service desk a really crucial role, because the service desk is often that first point of call with the consumer, and the consumer is key in the Verism model, but also, of course, in the whole new economy which has emerged as a result of the digital age. So, for those of you that have already heard about Verism, you probably know about the management mesh, and a lot of people think that's the most interesting part of Verism, and it is a very interesting part, and I'll explain it in a little while. But actually, Verism also contains a lot more than that. It contains a lot of guidance, for example, around which behaviours and organisational structures need to be developed to realise sustainable cultural change. So it's a lot about behaviour, mindset, culture, and providing specific guidance around that to support digital transformation. So the management mesh, it's really not rocket science, the management mesh, but it's very useful. It's basically what you see here. It contains 4 different elements. The first one is resources, and that includes people, budget, but also, time and knowledge. It considers environment, and that includes the organizational culture that, an organization is operating in, but also elements like, the competition, legislation that you may need to consider, and also looks at, the service stabilizers like processes and measurements and tools, which I'm sure you're familiar with. The third element is management practices, and these could be IT focused. Certainly, there are a lot of IT management practices out there that I'm sure you're familiar with some of them, but it doesn't have to just be IT focused. It could also be management practices from different parts of the business, for example, financial management or HR. And the fourth point is emerging technologies, and that's where we come up against, AI and blockchain and cloud and Internet of Things and all these different technologies which we've covered a little bit earlier as well. And there's a couple of particularly interesting things about the management mesh. One is that it's unique to your particular organization, because if you think about it, no two organizations will have that same mix of resources, environment, management practices, and emerging technologies. So it's unique to each organization. And yeah, so it kind of does away with that whole one size fits all. And the second thing, which is particularly interesting, is that it can be flexed based on new and changed requirements. If you think about, if, for example, the organization that you're working in had made their management mesh 1.5 years ago, for instance, before the pandemic began, and then making it today, it would probably look quite different, because we had to accelerate that digital transformation. We had to adapt. There were certain things that we couldn't do that we could do before. So, the management mesh can be flexed based on new and changed requirements, to help you really look at, where am I now? Where do I need to be? And you can continually evolve it as requirements change, and your business environment changes, and we know that inevitably it will change. So the management mesh supports that evolution. And the last sentence here, it helps identify the right balance of technologies and management practices to support your digital strategies. And for me, that echoes back to the quote of Nancy Burse from Johnson Technologies about identifying that right balance of technologies and management practices, to support what your customers need, and therefore your own digital strategies. So the management mesh can be a very useful tool in trying to bring all of that together and identify that right balance, integrate it, and bring it together. So what about the service desk in the management mesh? Again, I've been asked to think a bit more about, the links with service desk. There are many different ways that you can, fill in a management mesh. So there's no correct answer here, or there's no one way of looking at it. So I've just pulled out a few things that came to my mind. If you think about resources, then obviously you have to staff the service desk adequately. Also, resources in terms of asset management, quite often some of that is managed from the service desk. And of course, knowledge management is key at the service desk, because you're getting a lot of information in that you have to try and make sure can be captured and reshared and reused by others. On the environment side, I picked out the dreaded GDPR, the data privacy laws that most of us are confronted with in some ways in our daily, maybe our private lives, but certainly our business lives, because it's very important, of course, to be able to protect people's privacy. And certainly with AI, that's becoming even more a consideration. So I could imagine at the service desk that you sometimes deal with some sensitive information and some people related information. So that could be legislation that's relevant. From an organizational culture perspective, customer centricity, the whole CX way of looking at things, and also, obviously processes and procedures are important at the service desk as well, and they can act as service stabilizers and be very important. From a management practices perspective, of course, there are service management frameworks and approaches. I'm sure most of you are familiar with ITIL, but Verism is itself, it's not a service management framework, but it is a service management approach. But also, I'd like to mention SIAM, because as integration and multi-vendor environments become more the norm, SIAM becomes very important. And I can imagine that from the service desk, you're sometimes confronted with that multiple supplier and people bouncing from one supplier to another and blaming others. And of course, SIAM can really help with tackling that issue. And, CX and UX, of course, is worth mentioning, because that's really that experience focus that we've mentioned before. And on the emerging technology side, AI, I'm sure most of us have been served by a chatbot in the last 6 to 12 months. That's becoming very much a standard. Of course, there's a lot of automation opportunities on a service desk. I've also mentioned Internet of Things, and it's not there, but also, bring your own device. I can imagine at the service desk that you're quite often confronted with people having much more varied devices. People expect to be able to connect in many different ways now, in a mobile way, and that can sometimes be complex, an extra complexity for the support at the service desk. And I've also mentioned big data because, of course, the data that comes into the service desk can be analysed and used for business benefit. So they're just a few of the things that I've picked out about relevant aspects in a management mesh for the service desk. But it's just an example. There are many different elements that you could include in a management mesh that are relevant for the service desk. So we've created a kind of Verisum roadmap, which might be interesting for some of you to look further at. It's got basically 10 steps to adapting, applying and adopting Verisum. And, the steps are around these kinds of elements, like establishing digital leadership and enterprise governance, defining your transformation approach, which can differ, of course, from organization to organization. Some of the cultural elements, like being able to embrace change, developing collaborative and consumer-centric behaviors, creating a learning culture. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of, fail fast. It's very much something that's in the Agile DevOps way of learning. So developing that learning culture becomes important. Identify and close the capability gap. Again, that capability gap is one of the main challenges that a lot of organizations have with digital transformation. And, the management mesh can be a useful tool to help identify that gap. And developing awareness, making sure that people have the knowledge and skills they need to be able to, have success with digital transformation. So that's almost all I wanted to say about Verisum. I know it's a very short introduction if you haven't heard of it before. But it's, that's the core of it I've mentioned. Basically, Verisum is an approach that helps organizations to develop the agile culture that's needed for digital transformation. So it's really about creating business agility, creating, that behavior and that mindset that's needed for successful digital transformation. But it also very specifically helps organizations to integrate methodologies and technologies that support their digital strategies via the management mesh and to govern them under one model. And that's why we sometimes refer to Verisum as a kind of umbrella approach, because it helps you bring all of those things together, the different methodologies, the different technologies, and to bring them together, to integrate them and govern them under one model. So sometimes we think of it as an umbrella approach. So a lot's going on with Verisum, and I just want to share that with you a little bit. Here's just a few photos of what's going on. The launch in China, a group of candidates in Bangalore, a group of candidates in the Netherlands, here in the Netherlands, where I am, where I'm located, that have done Verisum as part of a digital transformation officer career path. And at the top is a group of candidates from the European Central Bank in Frankfurt. So there's a lot of stuff going on, and it's in different areas of the world, which is nice to see. It seems to have quite a global resonance. So just very briefly on Exyn, you may have heard of Exyn, you may not have. We have more than 35 years of experience and are independent, so vendor neutral. We don't offer training ourselves. It's vendor neutral certification. Certification in different areas, obviously service management, and we've been in that area for a long time, but also agile DevOps and security and data protection, and more recently emerging technologies. We have certification in more than 10 languages, so we're very global and with many different delivery channels available. So here's the Exyn digital transformation portfolio very briefly. There are elements in the area of security and compliance and risk, particularly data protection and information security management are very strong programs. Agile principles and culture is another category, and we put Verisum into that category because it's essentially about developing business agility. But we also have a program for Agile, Scrum and DevOps and Lean IT, to mention a few. Tech and mobile savviness, that's where certification for blockchain and AI and cloud computing comes in, and Internet of Things, but also data center management, for instance, and business intelligence and processes. SIAM is there, which can be considered in some ways service management, but in some ways kind of supplier management, and business analysis and big data, just to name a couple of those. So we do have a certification program for Verism, of course, and there are different levels. I'm just going to focus on the two core ones, though. There's Verism Foundation, and that's what you'd expect from a foundation. I think most of you are probably familiar with the foundation level certification, covering the basic concepts, the basic terminology. It's about creating a shared language. And the Verism Professional is on top of that, and that's really for practitioners. It's really about applying knowledge in practice. So it includes practical assignments actually as part of the exam or the assessment. So it's very practical. It's to make sure you get value on the work floor, that you can actually apply knowledge. So the foundation and the professional are the two main modules in the scheme. I'd also like to just mention that Verism also appears in a couple of career path certifications that we have within Exin. One of them is the Digital Transformation Officer, and that consists of a number of building blocks on the foundation level for related to technologies, emerging technologies, and also then Verism Professional on the advanced level. So basically, making sure that you have knowledge of technology, but on Verism Professional helps you to get more the cultural change side of digital transformation and, creating business agility. And those building blocks together make up the Digital Transformation Officer career path. And the other one I'd like to mention is Agile Service Manager, which has, on the foundation level, an Agile Scrum component and an IT service management component, and then Verism Professional on the advanced level. And actually, Verism Professional really covers, basically, it's an Agile service management approach. So those building blocks together lead to the Exin Agile Service Manager certification. So I think, how long? Yeah, I've been talking for long enough now. We have time for some questions, but that was all that I wanted to present today. So thank you very much for listening, and I'll hand it over to you, Rudy, to see if there are any questions.
Thank you, Susan. So if you want to connect with Susan, it's susan.galetli@exin.com. Can you say your last name so I don't spell it wrong?
It's Galetli.
Galetli, right.
And don't worry, most English people wouldn't know how to pronounce it either.
Yeah, sure. I will also write it in the chat. Galetli@exin.com. Here we go. If you don't mind, stop sharing the screen.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So let me hold on. That's me, and can you hear? All right. So we had Muhammad. He wanted to ask a question. Muhammad, if you're still with us, I think you still are with us. Do you mind asking it live? Muhammad Badreddin. Hi, Muhammad. Are you still with us? All right.
Yes, hi.
Yes, here we go.
Yes, how are you?
Very good.
Yeah, my question was, don't we have enough unemployment, so we are going to make things digital, especially regarding the coronavirus, how it hits everyone, and especially the economy all over the world? That's my question.
Sorry, I think I missed the first part of it, because I heard you mention about, I think about, unemployment and the financial impact of the crisis. What was the actual question? I'm sorry.
Yeah, what I was saying, that don't we have enough unemployment?
I'm still not sure what you mean by, yeah, I'm still not sure what you're
Yeah,
actually
let me
asking.
try to take his question.
Yeah.
Yes,
Because
please.
everything is going digital, so
Yeah.
we're losing jobs. This is what he thinks he means. And now we have a lot of unemployment in the same time. So is digital gonna take more of the jobs section? I think you mentioned that part.
Okay, yeah, I understand, Mohammed. Thanks. Yeah. So I think, and thanks for clarifying, Rudy. Yeah. So yes, we do have a lot of unemployment, and yes, the pandemic, of course, will have a financial impact, I think, in many different regions for many years to come. So the point is, though, I suppose, there's no turning back. We can't turn it back. It's here to stay. And organization, we've seen many examples, of course, of organizations that haven't managed to adapt to digital, and they have stranded along the way because they've been taken over by other organizations that have done it. So I think only the market will actually determine what the pace of change is, but I don't think there's any way back. As I mentioned in the research, though, actually at least between now and 10 years, it's only expected that 5% of jobs will be eliminated by automation and AI related technologies. The point is, though, that most of them will change. So all of us as professionals, we need to be able to adapt to that change. We need to be able to reskill ourselves so that those jobs that aren't disappearing, but they are changing, that we can change with it, and be able to have the skills that are needed, because the jobs will change. They won't disappear very quickly, but they will change, and we need to get reskilled with it.
Yeah, thanks for that. Let's go to a second from Nasser. Do you mind taking the question live?
Yes, Rudy, thank you. Hello, Suzanne. Thank you for the presentation. I just wanted to know that I work we are an ATO, and I work both in training as well as consulting. I would like to know about the future for Verism, or the adoption as you see it for the region, in terms of certification, exams, adoption, the potential in the region. When the region, I mean the Middle East.
Yeah, so, the tricky thing about ITIL and the whole thing about ITIL and Verism, we have to remember that ITIL has been around for many, many years. Yeah. And, Exin was one of the organizations that was actually making ITIL big. And I can tell you that ITIL, we could have killed it many times before it actually became big. It started off small, and it started off in government circles, and then it started to get more and more adoption, and it grew. But that was a very gradual growth curve to get it to where it needs to be today. Verism is, of course, in a different phase. It's a startup almost, if you like. There's not a massive how can I say that, a massive maturity level yet. Verism adoption is in its first stages, but what we do see is regionally, or I should say globally, in many different regions, we see it starting to be taken up. Microsoft is looking at it from Japan. China is looking at it. We had a launch there with different companies finding it interesting. European Central Bank here in Europe. We have companies like Vocalink in the UK looking at it. So quite big companies. So adoption and interest is really starting to grow, but it's very much in a different phase, of course, than ITIL, because it's been around for 2 or 3 years. Whereas ITIL's been around for however many it is, I think more than 30, or maybe around 30. In terms of the Middle East specifically, I find that difficult to answer, to be honest, because I don't have the local knowledge of the market in the Middle East as much as probably many of you here do. But I would definitely expect that where there has been, and there maybe still is, a need or a need for IT service management, so ITIL, then Verism could always be useful, because I think that digital transformation is not, there's no regions that are excluded from digital transformation. All regions are having to look at this. All regions are having to try to adapt to the new economy 4.0. So I would expect that the same challenges that we see in other areas will also be in the Middle East, and that, where organizations have looked to ITIL for service management, they could benefit from Verism for more specific guidance around digital transformation.
Thank you. Regarding both, maybe the number of exams that are taken in the region can be an indicator if there's an increase in the number of exams.
Yes, except adoption normally, though, occurs, normally, like, organizations, first of all, look at Verism or any other kind of new approach and find it interesting and start to adopt it. And then as that adoption increases, then there becomes a training market. And then as training market becomes more mature, the certification. So I know very much from my own experience working from Exin that certification is quite often very much at the end of the line of adoption. But yeah, certainly, of course, as we move forward and that becomes more evident, that can be a signal. But for the moment, we're looking more at, which organizations are finding it interesting, which organizations are looking at it, starting to adopt it, which regions are showing interest. And, we found a lot of interest so far emanating from areas of Asia. So there's a lot of interest from China, from Japan, from India, those regions. But I expect it to follow globally as well. And in Europe, there's also certainly some interest as well. For example, the European Central Bank.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah, we have a question from Matthias. How can that be? There is such a gap between industrial expectation and university education.
Yeah, that's a really good one, Matthias. And yeah, it is amazing. In some ways, I'm quite grateful for it, because that's the whole reason why we as Exin can add value. Because quite often what people learn at university, although it's very useful and it provides them with a good grounding, let's be honest, quite often it doesn't prepare them for the workplace, and it doesn't prepare them for the pace of change of the workplace. And that's why, for instance, Exin as an organization that's where we can provide added value, because we can provide professional certification in those areas to close that gap and make sure that what's actually that people are also prepared for what's actually happening out there, and we can move with those times. The reason, the answer to the question, how can it be that there's such a gap? I don't think there's an easy answer to that question, but I fear that part of it is maybe to do with the pace of change within governmental organizations. I think it's a lot easier for an organization like Exin to move with the times and look at, what's happening with AI, what's happening with blockchain, to incorporate emerging technologies and new developments like Agile into our certification portfolio. I think it's perhaps a lot easier for us to do that than for an entire education system to change very quickly. But I do think that education systems, they will have to become more agile, because the pace, the way the world is changing so quickly these days, we need to make sure that gap just doesn't become bigger and bigger. And if educational organizations stay still, that gap can only get bigger. So they'll also have to find ways of becoming more agile and being able to update their own education systems more frequently and keeping more with the times, because otherwise that gap will just get bigger and bigger, and that it's already pretty big.
Indeed, it is, and it is growing by the day, because technology is so fast versus the current education system or whatever. If anybody has an extra question, please raise your hand and go take it directly. Meanwhile, we invite you to connect with us, and if you have anything with Susan, you can connect on her email.
Yeah, and with LinkedIn as well. Certainly,
Yeah,
you can
yeah.
connect with me on LinkedIn.
I'll get
Yeah.
your LinkedIn link now and also post it directly. So we're gonna go for the last round, 1 minute of questions, if anybody is there. Yeah, thanks, Joe. Let me
Thank you.
grab Susan LinkedIn. Here we go. So what do you think we might, you know, or we know it, but what is the your advice for the future generation that is current now to be specialized in a couple of words? We've seen the World Economic Forum, we've seen the LinkedIn numbers, but what would be your final advice for this people who are maybe in the field, maybe who are in a service desk, or maybe for the students, or maybe the graduates?
I think, you know, Rudy, my final word would be make sure that you have a lifelong learning mindset, because what you learned yesterday, it can very easily not be relevant tomorrow. And, you know, we've also talked about the financial crisis. We've talked about the high levels of unemployment. You know, the one way that you can stay relevant is when you make sure that your skills are up to date and that you're keeping, you know, with the times, and basically just keep learning. And, you know, what that could also do as well, and this is a knock-on effect, but also if more people develop a lifelong learning mindset, that can also help to bring in underrepresented groups into the labour market as well, which increases diversity. And research has shown again and again that diverse teams perform better. So, you know, lifelong learning, it's the key to all of it. It's how we as professionals can stay relevant, and it's how organizations can get ahead of the game.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we are, you know, teaching certain things that in the next 10 years, they won't exist. Same thing where, you know, there's some certain jobs that will be replaced. But I think as Muhammad, you know, going back to his comment, we've seen history repeat itself. Technology is always, you know, enhance things. But let's say a typewriter engineer at the point of time in the 60s or the 50s, the same guy upskilled his, you know, knowledge and skills, and then he went into the computer business. So it will happen with different things, and we just need to be there and ready. Because I always say, especially I used to have many colleagues, always prepare for your next job, you know, because some of them, they actually sleep on their job, not in terms of physical, but in terms of mental and education, and they don't want to progress their skills. So always prepare for your next job, because if it comes and you're not there, what did you do? You committed suicide. So with that, I think there's no more questions. Let me check quickly on YouTube just in case. All right, we don't have. Susan, this was lovely. Thank you a lot for being with us, and hopefully people were able to you know, get the Verizon effect and benefits from this and the XN1. Thank you for all the participants today who have participated, and please do join our social media and our WhatsApp group. Yeah, well, we lost electricity. This is normal, but we continue. So with that, I will conclude our session, and thank you again, Susan, and thank you again all, and see you next month with another event.
Thank you, Rudy. Thank you, everybody. Bye now.
Bye-bye.